Ladies and gentlemen, it is with pleasure that we introduce today's host, President and CEO of the American Public Human Services Association, Tracy Waring Evans.
Welcome back to the APHSA Leadership Corner. I'm excited to once again be your host as we continue this series of conversations designed to spark inspiration and innovation. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today with Dr. Darrick Hamilton, moderated by Dr. Raquel Hatter. But first, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, a few words about the Leadership Corner. This is an ongoing series for APHSA, which we kicked off in 2020 as the COVID-19 pandemic shifted many aspects of our life to virtual settings. And really, our goal was to give just a little something back to all of you, leaders in health and human services across the country. And as we continue the series, our goal hasn't changed. We are here to provide you with passionate speakers, you're going to hear two today, timely content, and lively discussions that speak to leading in our current times, including today's session focused on leadership insights with Dr. Darrick Hamilton. At the American Public Human Services Association, we remain committed to advancing race equity, and alongside many of you, continue to work to influence policies and practices that address, and more importantly, dismantle structural bias and inequity, connect leaders to resources, organizations, and best practices to apply a race equity lens, and build capacity within human services to promote social and economic mobility and health and well-being for everyone. It is our hope that both these past and present conversations will inspire you, helping each of us to keep that fire ignited so we can continue to lead together for a better tomorrow. And I just want to express my appreciation and commitment to all of you for your commitment to people and places and everything that you bring to your team, your community, your state, your own families every day. We hope to be able to see you again in person very soon, and I would encourage those of you who haven't checked it out to check out our website for our upcoming events this fall. So let me move on and just take a moment to thank all of you, all of our strategic partners, industry partners, for their underwriting of this series, as well as their ongoing support for many of our events. We are truly fortunate to have the support of so many leaders, both within private industry, community-based organizations, and philanthropy, working alongside public agencies to help achieve our shared vision for thriving communities built on human potential. And so before we get started, I just want to make sure everybody knows to put your questions in the Q&A pod, which is on the right side of your screen. You can enter questions throughout the session. So if something comes to you, please put it in there. And if you're on social media, you can use the hashtag APHSA Leadership Corner and include the handles you see here on the screen. So now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce true steward for advancing social and economic mobility in place, a partner and a dear friend to APHSA, Dr. Raquel Hatter, Managing Director, Human Services within the Kresge Foundation. I am grateful for Raquel's leadership and her friendship, and through her, we have met so many amazing leaders across the nation, including our featured guest today, who Raquel will now introduce. So Raquel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tracy, and good afternoon to all, and thank you again on behalf of APHSA for being here today and looking forward to this conversation with our friend and colleague, Dr. Darrick Hamilton, who is a great leader in his work, an economist and a leader at the New School, and leading work there around solutions to poverty. And so I would like to bring Darrick on now, and we have a title slide that will give you more information about who he is, and I think you have a bio as well. And so, good afternoon, Dr. Hamilton.
I think there's a little sound delay as we transition from backstage onto on stage. So not only good afternoon, gratitude to you and Tracy for offering me this opportunity to engage with you in conversation.
Absolutely, looking forward to it. So, Dr. H, as I sometimes call you, as a part of this discussion, I thought that one, I would like to start by giving you the opportunity to tell us more about what you do, your work, and the focus of the work there at the new school, and the many things that you've done to contribute to this conversation around economic inclusion and the 21st century economic Bill of Rights. And then from there, the purpose of this session today is to get a fundamental understanding just of your work, but then moreover, really want to understand what this journey is like for you as a Black male leader and economist in this, so that we want the audience to understand what it is you're charged with and what you're committed to. And then thereafter, I'll ask you about what brought you to this journey, one of your favorite questions, I know. So let's start with your work and what you and your team are doing. And I just want to thank you and your team again for your partnership with Kresge, with the Kresge Foundation. I'll hand it off to you.
And the gratitude is mutual. As Tracy said, you bring us all together. You provide the structure, the resources to facilitate us to do this work. Also, gratitude to everyone out here in the audience, APHSA, and the work they do. So let me lead with gratitude and say that I'm a scholar. So first and foremost, my identity is an economist engaged in trying to understand the causes and consequences, as well as the remedies to address racial, ethnic, and just inequality broadly. That is my motivation. That is who I am. And in doing that work, I'm not interested in uncovering knowledge only for the sake of knowledge, but rather to change political economy, to generate a more moral political economy. And, the work has led me to understand that there are structural barriers as well as gross inequities from the past that are ongoing today that do not fulfill what we want to ascribe as people being able to have economic inclusion, civic engagement, and social equity. So what we do at the Institute is try to engage in the skill sets that we've gathered in the academy to understand relationships and phenomena. But again, not just for knowledge creation, but to apply that knowledge in a way that can facilitate human capabilities, to facilitate people to have self-determination. So, I'll be real quick and just say that our work is not just scholarship, it's applying that scholarship in practical and policy ways. And then finally, public engagement, being able to interact with foundations, media, policymakers, advocates, service providers, because it's going to take a social movement. It's a recognition that individuals in and of themselves won't be able to do it by themselves, but rather they need resources to be empowered. And hence the framework of what we've been talking about, an economic rights initiative, ensuring that it's not just political rights, civil rights, the right to vote, the right to make choices, the right to assembly. That's important and it's critical. And, we have made some success as a society in fulfilling that, although we have a long way to go. But it's well entrenched in our public psyche. But what's not well entrenched in our public psyche is economic rights, that in order to be empowered, to reap the rewards of a market, your ingenuity, your efforts, you need some resources. If not, the world will dictate to you, or you're simply at the whim of charity.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I was reflecting on when I first heard you speak some years ago. I think it was at an Aspen Institute Equity Summit. And I really appreciate your point of view and even how you deliver what you have to say in a way that's pretty clear, matter of fact, and reflective of your commitment and passion about this work and the families and the communities across this country. I wonder if you could now, onto one of your favorite questions, tell us about what brings you to this journey. I remember, I think last year at some point when we were talking, preparing for something else, and I had asked what brought you to this journey. You said, well, no one's ever asked me that. And so this is my second time asking you that. So I thought it'd be interesting for folk to understand why this matters to you, other than obvious reasons why we think it should matter to anyone. So could you share that if you don't mind?
And I'm afraid I'm probably going to fall short from the original answer, but I'm going to give it my best shot. What brings me to this journey is probably somewhat circumstances and somewhat attributable to who I am as a person. But most of it's probably social. I'd say I'm fortunate. I've been well trained. I've had access to a lot of good schooling, as well as empathetic people interested in conveying knowledge to me and the ability to translate knowledge all throughout my life. So I'm brought to this work by sacrifices of others. That a lot has been a lot of personal sacrifice as well as resources, even from foundations. I know early on, for example, I was a recipient of a Robert Wood Johnson grant, a Ford Foundation grant, while I was in undergrad, while I was in graduate school, and when I just completed graduate school. So people have invested a lot in me, and I've been in environments where I've not only developed a love for knowledge, and also I think that's critical. So, there's a lot of conversation talking about critical race theory, and I know that's become a boogeyman for some nefarious forces to, in my view, get us away from talking about race, justice, and history. But nonetheless, I think when we educate children, and from my own personal experience, I benefited a great deal from understanding power, inequality, and injustice as a scholarly endeavor, as an understanding of power. That intellectual understanding was really useful. But what's more, it's not just intellectual; it's personal as well. I come from environments where I've seen injustice act out within my own family. I've seen the sacrifices of relatives that has cost them their health, literally their life. So I think it's a combination of factors. One, my training. Somehow there's a strong commitment towards justice, as well as a facilitation of people allowing me to be intellectual in my understanding of power, as well as emotional.
Thank you. Thank you for that. My next question has to do with the importance of, while we know that diversity is important, it's not enough. And why is that? How is that diversity not enough? And how is it that we know it's not synonymous with equity and inclusion? So what would you say about those factors as pertains to you as a leader and your work?
And even thinking about, why do we care about diversity? Well, first and foremost, we should be desegregating the elite positions. It's a problem if we have the composition of the most preferred positions in society reserved for men or reserved for white people. If it's reserved for some specific demographic, and we sort or facilitate access based on that demographic, that's a problem. That's unjust. So that in and of itself is enough to change. But there's another reason why we might want diversity, which I find even more compelling. And that is, if we want to have change, if we want to do something different than the status quo, if we want innovation, we need to recognize that all approaches come from some norms. I'm an economist, and my discipline likes to portray our models, our empirical evidence, as scientific, as some value neutral endeavor that's just grounded in science. Well, that's a farce. The questions we ask, our foundation always begins with some norm. And it's useful to have people bring in norms that are beyond the status quo. Otherwise, we will replicate society, whether it's just or unjust, and in many times in an unjust way. In other words, privilege will do what it does best, which is replicate and try to recreate itself. So if we want to have pathways for justice, then we want to provide access so that those innovative, fresh ideas can be foundational to the approaches as well as the evidence that we bring to bear to have a better society.
Thank you. So Dr. Hamilton, given your status ascribed as a Black male and in this work as an economist, tell us more about what is it like for you? And I'm imagining that there's some degree of dissonance that folks might experience for a number of reasons. When they hear from you, it's clear that you're well informed, well studied, you have lived experience. So what challenges have you faced in this role as a Black man? And how have you contended with those?
Yeah. So, and the word you use is spot on, dissonance. When when people see me, it is not consistent with what they would expect for a university professor of economics. The image of what they see is not me, or what they expect to see. So there's a socialization process that they expect something, and I present something different. So then the word that social psychologists have used, cognitive dissonance, is erected, where they have to make sense of the world. So there's that, and I've often had to deal with people trying to, in their head, explain away who I am, which requires me. And then there's a question towards me. So there's a question of my credibility. There's a question of my credentials, and what's imposed upon me. And one thing that if I were to look back in time and give myself advice, I would say that it is burdensome to always have to demonstrate and prove yourself to somebody. And who we are, and what we bring to this work has a big deal in how we interact with others. And I'm someone who played a lot of sports, developed a competitive spirit. I personally don't have a need to have to dominate somebody, but I always want to be able to compete and don't like to be diminished and marginalized. So thinking about who I am and that cognitive dissonance, I'd say the biggest cost that has been borne on me is the burden of always trying to demonstrate that I belong, trying to be perfect all the time, the cumulative stress of not allowing myself to let go and just be myself, and the effort and energies invested in trying to show someone who's hard to convince. And I gave you the euphemistic explanation of why somebody might have cognitive dissonance, the notion that they've been socialized to see the world a certain way, but then I come and present the world in a different way. But there are also some approaches that are not so euphemistic, where people just want to maintain power, where I present a threat to the preferred access to a hierarchical position that's against the norm by which some group of people might feel entitled. And, that ladder that I just described, I really am wasting a whole lot of energies and time and always trying to demonstrate. And what is that lost time, that lost energy? What did I lead off with in the conversation? My goal is nothing less but to work with others to change political economy, to make for a more moral economy. What more loftier goal is that than to try to engage in these little fights that seem petty? They didn't seem petty at the time when I was coming up, or petty when I had to fight them. But looking back, where I've had some modicum of success, looking back, I can see that they were petty, that what else could have happened with my energy and time? And then frankly, in a lot of ways, I'm fortunate. What if I would have succumbed to some of that pressure of always trying to be perfect, of always trying to make sure that there's no vulnerability? That's a whole lot of stress that I think ultimately bears upon our health. I haven't gone into citing a lot of statistics, but I think people in this audience, and it's now coming to be generalized information, that there are huge health disparities when we compare across racial groups, for instance, or we compare across some individuals that are marginalized versus those that aren't. That stress, that stigma, it bears upon people and manifests in negative health. And what's more, I would argue, and great scholars like Sherman James, who has the theory of John Henryism, that it's not only just the marginalization and the stress, it's the effort, it's the coping, it's trying to overcome that stress, trying to demonstrate to others a belonging that has a consequence and a cost on individuals. That trying to always be perfect, be good, work hard, study hard. We want a society where people do those things, but we want a society where they do those things and don't face negative consequences as a result, and actually reap the fair rewards that's associated with those efforts. But what we also need to understand is when we ask people to work twice as hard to get by, that has a consequence on them as well as their communities. So, this was a long-winded answer, but the long-winded answer I'll try to put a button on and say, if I could go back in time and think about the ways in which I've had to cope and deal with relationships where people imposed microaggressions and tried to diminish some of who I was and question my belonging. Why did I spend so much time trying to prove to those individuals that in a lot of cases, they really didn't have power. Some did and some still do, but it was a gross waste of my time, effort, and energy. And I believe that it probably stunted all the things that I could have accomplished. And that's a regret.
Thank you. I think what you just said just leads to a few more questions. Maybe we can go deeper on that with regard to for folks who are listening. So how do you recognize when someone is trying to get you to prove something or discount your competence or what you bring? Like, do you have any physiological triggers? Like, what happens for you internally, and what are you trying not look like you have to bubble and then what you actually say? Like, what triggers you, and how do you know what you're contending with?
Yeah, and I, the advice I would give younger people coming up is I'd say if they're self-aware, that's a critical emotional intelligence to be self-aware, to know when you're being accused, when you're being triggered. And the problem, Raquel, is that many times we don't know when we're being triggered, and we don't know how to react in the moment. And that's why that self-awareness is a critical skill. But what happens? My heart starts palpitating. My palms get sweaty, right? It triggers an emotional response. My cognitive functioning is not as good because I'm thinking about that query as opposed to, did that person diminish me? Did they say that because I'm Black? Those are the things that go in your head that distract you from the cognitive task at hand, and also the physical stress that I just articulated. Your heart racing, the sweaty palms, etc. It's if you have a self-awareness, perhaps you can control it and mitigate it to some extent. But it's the subtlety, right? So in some ways, maybe a blatant racist epithet or something like that. Of course, that's going to cause a reaction as well. But maybe it'll be less harmful than the more subtle ones for which you have to guess and think about, well, what did they mean by that? So in the moment, I'd say that those are all the things that take place. And again, I want to repeat, if I'm giving advice to young people or if I have a child or if I'm teaching people, one of the most critical emotional intelligence somebody can have is self-awareness. And with that self-awareness, you may even be aware of the negative thing, the cost that it's imposing on you, and there may be some limits to what you can do about that cost, but there may be some actions that you can take. For example, you can make the decision if you're self-aware of, is it worth engaging that individual? Am I wasting my time by engaging that individual, and is it distracting me from my goal? Or you may say, well, knowing my personality, I just can't let that go. I'll be mad at myself 5 minutes from now if I didn't address that comment. So, you may say in that moment, well, I'm going to address it. I'm not going to let it go. But whatever decision you make, those are individual decisions. They're circumstantial, depending on the context, who's involved. But the extent to which you can be self-aware and have control, the better off you are.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Last week we were doing a reading. Someone was guiding a reading for us around Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. And part of the question was, well, how do you decide when to intervene or when to respond? I'll say something different from react. How do you weigh that? You in your role, how do you decide to let it go, separate and apart from the just you, in terms of how you might be experiencing it personally? How does the cause contribute to your decisions, given the weight of the charge that you are committed to?
Yeah. And by the way, I hope we get to stay on the screen together, because I actually do better when I can react and look at you. So I'm glad. All right, thank you. So how do I react? How do I deal with it? I'd say that again, those are going to be individual things, and that's where self-awareness is because you got to know what you can put up with. It might be the case that you have had enough and you need to just go to the movie theaters. Yeah, I'll say, I'm going to get to the answer to the question. I'm going to be a little long-winded for this one and say, one day somebody made the point, a lot of young people now use the term self-care. And, I'm going to be honest and say, I used to laugh in my head at it, like, that you want to go get your nails done, you want to go do all of that. And I was wrong. I could say that the younger people thinking about self-care, they're right. And I misunderstood the concept. And somebody broke it down to me by telling me stuff like, if you're in the hospital, if your health is not good, you're not helping any cause. You're not helping anybody. So self-care, it's a term that's come up and been used. And I would associate it with also self-awareness. So with that self-care, that doesn't mean you shouldn't engage but you got to know your personal limits and know when you've had enough and it becomes unhealthy for you. Again, thinking about what's good for the cause of trying to bring justice. So that was kind of a tangent answer, but I'll try to give a more specific answer in the sense that things that I find more noble, especially, is when people intervene on behalf of underdogs, on behalf of some people that are being bullied. So also, if I look back at regrets in my life, I think I have a personality positive trait where I believe that in my history and past, I have stood up for people that are underdogs, that when an injustice is occurring to them, a willingness to speak out, even if it doesn't directly affect me. But also I have regrets because if I do self-awareness and self-evaluation, the moments in life where I get more mad at myself is when I reevaluate events and I think back to them. And I could cite many, I'm not on this forum, but where I wish I would have intervened more. So my advice to people now in a prospective way, if you really want to be noble, if you really want to be committed to justice and righteous, not only stand up for yourself, but a willingness to stand up for others, even when there might be a cost to you or you're not directly involved. Those are some of the more noble, righteous acts in my mind of what an individual can do.
Thank you for that. I will say I'm happy that you rethought your position on nails because I just got mine done a few days ago. So I appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of my sisters of all groups got their nails done recently. So we thank you for that permission, sir. So we do have a question. I'm going to I have some other questions for you as well, but forgive me as I try to see right quick here. So please share your view on how Black men can obtain a more representative level of ownership of assets.
Capital. I mean, the source of wealth is wealth itself. It's really just that simple. We can nuance the position. A lot of people go to the knee-jerk reaction of if people were more financially literate, if they made better decisions, and good decisions are important. But the reality is that the most critical ingredient for wealth is wealth itself. Having some asset, some capital foundation. We often get the directional emphasis wrong. We think about education as driving wealth, but maybe it's wealth that drives education. We know that having a great deal of wealth will afford somebody the ability to go to an elite school or et cetera. And obviously I'm making the concept real simple. It's probably going in both directions, but to make the answer short and succinct, the key for Black men or anybody, any person, is having some capital foundation by which to begin. And from a private standpoint or an individual standpoint, we can't just create capital. It doesn't just appear out of thin air. Some people do cooperative economics and pool capital. There are some good models of that. But the ultimate authority of seeding capital to a population that does not have capital is government. They have done it in the past, and they can do it now, and they can do it in the future. Seeding people with a capital foundation so that they can get into an asset that will passively appreciate over their life. Of course, we want to have wraparound services like financial literacy, as well as some wraparound services like financial regulation, because however smart and astute you may be, the finance industry is more smart, more astute, and has more power, and anybody can get got. And that's why we need public power to not only regulate that incentive to extract and exploit, but also to seed people with capital so that they can have wealth.
Thank you. I appreciate all that you said, and especially the end where you said anybody can get got. Those are the realities. My husband has worked in university settings and is in the finance world, and also shares that journey of what it's like to be a Black male and folks trying to discount whether or not you're competent and whatnot. And I'm sure, like over this last year, especially with the illumination, if you will, of all the Black males who are had been killed, quite frankly, with regard to various interactions with law enforcement, and understanding that that is true for other groups. But in this case, today we're talking about Black males. I watched him try to contend with that and then show up and do his work. How have you managed that in your own psyche over this last year? And you're a professor and you're constantly imparting to others. Like, how do you show up in the classroom with students who are, troubled by this, and you're in a university setting? What do you do the day after or the day of, or when you have to show up?
Again, with emotional intelligence and with age, sometimes I cry. Sometimes I just stop and cry. Allow the emotions to get a hold of me. And again, that I'm proud of that. I used to be ashamed of it. It used to be real painful. I used to be mad at myself in a public setting. I think with age and astuteness, and I wish I could tell more Black men that it's okay to cry. It is. Society tells us we can't cry. And then let me say a little bit about intersectionality, because it's growing in importance, and we are now thinking about in nuanced ways the ways in which gender and race interact. So let me say a couple of things. Some may be controversial, some may not. I think we have become too naive in our understanding of intersectionality. We think Black and woman, then that must be worse, and that's intersectionality. Now, that is absolutely true in many contexts. If we look at wages, we know Black women have the lowest wages. We can look at sexual harassment at work. I know that I don't have to put up with that in ways that women in general, and especially Black women, might in certain work settings. But intersectionality is more than just saying Black and women is worse off. It is understanding the nuance of the context, and and what that context, the contours of that context that leads race and gender or any other identity to intersect in a nuanced way. Because when I just said that Black men are taught that they can't cry, and that's not an emotional outlet for them to deal with some of that pain of showing up, well, that's intersectionality. And part of the flip side is, even when we think about poverty, right now, thanks to the Biden administration, we want to give credit here, as well as not just the Biden administration, people who are in this audience and social movements in general that kind of made the Biden administration to get to this point. We have the child tax credit, which is about to go into effect, where people are going to start receiving income from the federal government, the tax code, simply because they are American taxpayers who have children in a refundable way. So this is a new policy. It's an anti-poverty program. It's an income mobility program. But you know what the narrative is? The narrative is we're going to cut child poverty in half. You know what's not in the narrative when we think about poverty? Picture us saying we're going to end poverty for Black men. That narrative we're not ready for as a society. We'll say those hardworking, undeserving men that should be out there, doing, in general, we don't think about, we should be saying we should end poverty, period, not just child poverty. We should end poverty across the board. But if we were to put the face of poverty as a Black man, we would not have any empathy, any sympathies. And that's intersectional. That's an intersectional analysis. So I guess, again, long-winded answer to say that what I do is I try to be self-aware. I'm going to try to grow in that area. I'm going to try to take care of myself. I'm going to try to engulf myself into networks. If that environment is not the most healthy for me to engage with, where I'm the only one, then I got larger social networks where I can go to. I can call Raquel. I can call you and get some uplift to my spirit or what have you. I know that isolation is a problem, so I'm going to use my networks, and I'm going to be emotionally sound and emit my emotions. And I'm going to fight for a world where I don't have to go through this also. So I'm committed to justice. So these are some of the things that I'm going to be doing.
Thank you. A couple things. You brought up narrative. I'm curious about when you reflect over, and I'll ask you two questions just in this process here. When you reflect over your own life, what, and reflecting on that, what do you think folks might have anticipated the narrative for you would be relative to what it actually is? And then the second one, get your, I know you're a professor, you probably got a slideshow on it, but I just want you to go from the top of the head. And so the second one is to the extent that you have young Black male nephews or cousins, just those younger folks, I'm talking even elementary age, how do you have the conversation with them to help them understand what this life is like for them? There's lots of discussion about this, to your point, around critical race theory and what kids should and should not be told. What we do know for kids of color, it's really not optional for family members to engage in this dialogue with them to help them understand their realities, and at the same time, trying to persuade them that they can be whatever they choose to be. That's a degree of dissonance as well. So those are my two questions, if you took those notes, and I'll see what you have to say.
So the first one, the narrative that people would ascribe to me is hard work, study hard, and look what you can become. That I am the American dream. That if only you work hard, you study hard, you can be a university professor and be fine. I wholeheartedly reject that narrative, because what people don't understand is what was lost in order for me to get to this point. And, you've heard me say this before. The ultimate sacrifice was I lost my parents. And especially my mother and my father, they were going to sacrifice themselves if it meant that I was going to have a quality education. They put me in educational environments that were beyond their financial reach, but they did so with all the stress. And it wasn't a decision I made, because if I was making a decision, I might have made a different decision so that I could have had them. But it's a decision they made that allowed me to have the success that I had. But what was the cost? I lost them. So that to me is not the American dream. That's an American nightmare. So what we need is to facilitate pathways for people to have success without having to make tragic choices in their life, either personal ones or personal ones for their children. The second question, young Black males, what advice do I give them? The sad thing is there is no formula that on the one hand, me encouraging them to, do those things, work hard, study hard. I also have the knowledge that those things literally can kill you. I'm not telling people not to do those things, but I'm telling people to be self-aware that there's stress associated with those things. So I think, now, of course, my own journey, I'm going to speak a little bit in circles, and it's hard coming up with your own narrative, this personal look inside. It's not always easy. And there's fear of authenticity, that I might get the story wrong. And that's my nightmare, that I tell something about myself that's inauthentic. So that's why you might hear me stutter a little bit and try to get the story out. But I also rejected poverty. I also experienced some poverty growing up, and was motivated that I was not going to be poor. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to be successful. I put a lot of pressure on myself to not have room for failure because I thought the consequences were going to be hard. So the fact that I'm successful, was that all me? Probably not. Probably there was some good luck in that journey. There was some good fortune to be put in places where, for instance, my best friend and I went to college and together, and his parents, when they would come to see him, would make sure that I had something.
Mhm.
So, that's luck. That had no, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I also want to thank you for
And Raquel, I said I wasn't going to cry this time, but a
look. And
liar
you
I
know what?
am.
You know what? Here's the deal, Dr. H. This stuff matters. It seems academic to some people, right? It's right. It's true that you're well credentialed and well informed, but at the end of the day, this is not no study, right? This is real life that we're talking about. So first, I want to thank you for your affirmation to Black men specifically, because this issue with being able to be true to what we're feeling and what you're feeling is really important. And I certainly understand that that is not necessarily a socialization process, especially in the Black community. And then the other thing I wanted to acknowledge is thanking you for your vulnerability and transparency with regard to your parents. I do remember the first time you shared that with me. And if you don't mind, I don't think this will be because we talk a lot about toxic stress, and adverse childhood experiences and how we think about families. As you reflect over that, what have you learned at this field of folks who are listening and who feel strongly about this? Some of the indicators of what that kind of stress has on kids when they're going through that. Like our kids, there were times when we were struggling and our lights would be off, and we would come up with all kind of reasons for why the lights were off. And so I think, and even when we talked to them today, they didn't know we were as bad off as we were. So did you actually know how hard it was for your parents when it was happening, or was it retrospectively?
I went to elite private schools, and then I lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant before gentrification. So I had exposure to multiple worlds, and again, I could see that the big difference was resources. So in a lot of ways, I did know because I could see difference. I could go to my friends' houses and see they had different resources. Stigma is a big thing, and again, how do we address these things? Ultimately through policy. So that becomes my love language, and it allows me to not be as emotional because it takes away from individuals and that. But I'm not ducking the emotions here, but I'm going to say that some of the advice I'd give the audience is, one of the things about we have this notion of entitlement and trying to ration who gets something and who doesn't get something. If everybody got it as a child, if it's universal, so take school lunch. I didn't experience this, but when we mark some kids with a free and reduced school lunch and some kids without, we're stratifying, we're setting hierarchy, we're setting stigma, we're setting stress. Give all the children a free lunch. Why isn't lunch available in school, period? At the point of delivery of service, that's not where we should be, especially on something as essential as food or housing, or even, again, let's shift the policy, healthcare. When you're going to see a doctor, that vulnerable position, when you're going to get a diagnosis of whether you have cancer or not, the financial stigma of whether you can pay or not should not be imposed at that point. And it goes multiple ways. The person delivering that care knows who you are and whether you can pay or not, and you know who you are and whether you can pay or not. So, for a better society, when we think about our children, we should not be rationing certain things based on where they came from, what family they were born into, their race, their gender. We should not be imposing that stress and stigma of a stratification on something as empowering and essential as food, as a quality education. So, those are the lessons. Those are the things, again, navigating the system. When I talk to individuals, if I have a child, I don't have a child, but if I had a child and young people that I talk to, my niece, my nephews, work hard, go to, I tell them all that stuff. But to some extent, there's a little guilt because I also know telling them too much to work hard and I'm imposing cost on them. That's gonna have consequence. But what do you do?
Thank you. I'm curious about if you can give us some insight into some of the tables that you sit around. And do you have any examples without being? You can use your discretion in terms of how specific you want to be. But I know you're an advisor to many. It's my impression that you learn how to have conversations, and sometimes they're perhaps not polarizing, sometimes they are. And how do you navigate those conversations, particularly within the context of, I'll say, code switching? How does that show up? How do you manage that?
Yeah, and code switching, sometimes we do it and don't even realize it. We slip into it. Sometimes we are intentional. We know the audience, and we're trying to be persuasive. So, one, don't waste your time engaging with people that really can't be convinced, that are dogmatic and ground in their ways, and in earnest might be using you or manipulating you for some other purpose. So having the wherewithal to know when you're about to be used and you're wasting your time, you shouldn't waste your time, and try your best to not be used. But when there is a possibility to engage, I won't name the commission, or the committee, but there was some committee that I got asked to join, and I was like, I'm probably not going to make headway. They probably want me because I'm the black man, leftist person, so they want to check that box. And I spoke with a real good, basically a maternal figure to me, who served the role as a maternal figure. And this woman had been through the struggle. So she came up in the civil rights era where she put her life limb on the line. And I could have a whole conversation about her and all the stuff she did. But let me say, one of the most admirable things about her, and this is a woman that the FBI harassed, life was threatened, et cetera, for the cause of civil rights and justice. She's a humanist. So I want to give that to me is one of the best accolades you can give somebody. I get called a race scholar, and I don't shy away from race. But at the end of the day, I hope I'm considered a humanist, that I hope people think of me, or if you're writing my epitaph, I hope that I leave this world as somebody that was concerned about humanity. So she told me I didn't have a choice. She told me, and that made the choice easy for me. She said, you went to those schools, we put you in those schools and those environments so that you can get those credentials, so that you can be in those rooms. So you don't have a choice but to go to those rooms. And that let me sigh and breathe, because I said, it's not my choice. That choice was made. So it was no longer a dilemma for me. I had to go to those rooms and choices. But in those rooms, you try to, one, don't ever compromise values. Don't ever compromise justice. Commit to justice, things that are right and wrong, just say it. Just say it. And, another quick anecdotal story. I've been doing, my institute and my team, we've been doing work on guaranteed income. And somebody asked me the question, they said, you're just going to give poor people money? How are you going to do that? Why would you do that? Why would you just give them money? And then the answer is simple. Because they're poor and they need money. And just pause and let that sit for a second, because that's the answer is obvious and the statement, the response is obvious. But why can't we just say that? Just I think we commit to our values, but we try to be good listeners. Hear what it is that people might have objection to. Hear what it is that they may understand that don't align with a reality from your lived experience and your built up knowledge and try to speak to those concerns. And in order to do that, you have to be a really good listener, and meet people where they are. But in that process, never compromise the values.
Thank you. How do you respond when we talk about these issues around macroaggressions, microaggressions? They were just becoming aggressions to me. But when they happen, how do you, I don't know if you have an example, again, you can be as specific or not as you choose to be, of a type of micro or macroaggression or offense that was race driven. How did you respond to that in that moment, like when it's right there in the moment, real time?
Yeah, and you know what, I might argue that a macroaggression is something blatant, where they just say you ain't getting this, or you may call you, black people just ain't smart. There's nothing micro, it's just aggression, right? And then a microaggression, they put a little subtlety in it. They leave some plausible deniability or something where, and the microaggressions, and I don't know which is worse, which is better, and it depends on which ones are more harmful or less harmful. But I'm gonna center on microaggressions a little bit and say that one of the issues of microaggressions is, one, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. One or two might slide off of you. But they keep coming. They keep coming. You keep putting up with these indignities at work, little subtleties. And the other thing is they require cognitive activity. So you have to decipher in your mind, well, was this an aggression? Well, what did they mean about it? So that's effort. That is, and it's effort that distracts you from the activity at hand. It's effort that leaves you mad as to, I shouldn't have let that go. I should have told that person off, right? These are all little subtleties that accumulate and build upon you. One of the biggest benefits of white privilege is a raceless identity. To be able to know that your identity is dominant and not have to think about identity, not have to question, was I treated a certain way because I was white? We don't look for privilege. We don't identify privilege. So in individual settings, we if you just go through life in a way where you think that you're being judged by your merit or something like that, and of course, white people have multiple identities. There's gender, there's disability status, etc. But for a black person, and we can talk about gender in certain settings, a black man in certain settings, right? You constantly have to evaluate a context or situation, a comment, through a racial lens, and that is taxing. And people say, well, why do you do that to yourself? Well, you ain't doing it to yourself. There's social stigma imposed upon you where you don't have the benefit not to have a racialized view or racialized identity when you interpret a situation. Because if you don't, it's naive, it's ignorant, and you might not have the most information to engage that situation. So, microaggressions, those are all the harms. How I engage specific ones oftentimes depends, because many times I think about them 5 minutes later where I'm mad I didn't notice it at the time. Many times I might notice them, and here's what we do in our personalities. My personality has been one where I try to establish dominance if I feel somebody's trying to challenge me. And, I'm self-aware. I know that's what I do, but I also know that that's not always the most healthy thing to do. It's always not the most healthy thing to do, because sometimes it's a waste of my time, that my energies could be put somewhere else. But sometimes it's necessary. Like, for example, in a classroom, we talked about, if this black man economist stands before a class of, say, undergraduates who are not used to seeing somebody in that position, they very well may say, well, who is this person trying to teach me about microeconomics? What do they know? So, now I guess in my long in the tooth days, I'm not challenged as much. But in my younger days, I used to wear a tie to try to throw them off or something like that. But they inevitably would challenge me. And in that moment, I think it was necessary to establish dominance. It is my classroom. It is, and I don't do it in a way where I have to. And people establish dominance in multiple ways. So, it might be, these are the rules of the syllabus, and if you don't abide by them, these are the consequences laid out, and that's just it. That's not my style. My style is, I like to intellectually spar with people. So mine is to take them on. So in that moment with some of those microaggressions or cognitive dissonance, I would take time in the class and let them go and try to challenge me. But I knew more information. So, I would, ask your query. And then their peers would sanction them. Their peers would, through ridicule or roll their eyes or whatever. But that was my technique. Those are individualized techniques. It's not one size fit all. Sometimes my technique is not the most healthy technique. But again, I think the lesson through all of this is self-awareness. Know what your strengths and weaknesses are and what you can and can't take, and be intentional in how you respond to them.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me throw an easy one in for you right now. Not the others have been hard, but so what's one of your old school favorite jams?
Well, on my Pandora list, I always tell, and I'm probably showing my age because I think more people listen to whatever that other one is as opposed to Pandora. Tony, Tony, Tony is my go-to station. And I like that song by Lucy Pearl, I Want to Dance Tonight. I want to dance tonight. Y'all don't want me to sing, but that's the one I like.
And not so bad, but yeah, stick to the economy. I'm with you on that. I appreciate that. Another one that's is real, but a bit lighthearted, I would say, is how do you, because now you wear an afro. How often has that come up for you? And perhaps not at this point, but I'm just curious as to if your afro throws people off. And I'm guessing you don't ever walk in with the pick in the back, like back in the day, and the fist. But just either way, just let me know how the afro goes over.
And I was looking around to see if I had one to demonstrate one of the picks, but I don't have one by my desk. But it's intentional that I wear an afro. It is a demonstration of my blackness, and we what we wear, how we perform. My scholarship leads me to say that identity is something that's not simply static and that we're born with. That we perform identity, we invest in identity, and our choices to invest in that identity is based on the rewards and punishments associated with that identity in certain contexts. And, we've been talking a lot about social psychology, cognitive dissonance, and cognitive functionings. I invest heavily in my blackness as a source of pride. I wear this afro in large part. Some of it is shade to my older friends who can't grow their hair as big. So that's just me being shady. We all like the peacock too, a red tie. I'm peacocking with a red tie. So we all look for points of distinction that we do. So, but I also am very aware that this is a demonstration of that I am Black. And I think that's a large part of why I keep it and why I wear it.
Thank you. So let's think about your circle of friends with regard to other Black men. Like, how do you create community? Like today you're talking about it's okay to cry or be true to emotion. Even if it's not crying, it could be a number of things. I think many folks learn happy, sad, and anger, How do you create community amongst your fellow brothers?
Yeah. And I could have some growth in that. Right now, some of my best friend are Black men. That was meant to be lighthearted and funny. But let's see. A lot of these friendships were developed through childhood. So I'm talking about ways in which I'm fortunate. Not only have I had access to really good schooling and empathetic teachers, but I've developed lifelong friendships from first grade all through grade school, and a lot of my Black male friends are still here today from those periods of my life. Even in college, I picked up friends. So I'm also self-aware that I have a good quality and that I have been able to pick up friendships, deep, meaningful friendships, in many walks of life and in many periods of life. And I don't know exactly why, but that is something I'm self-aware about. But we engage in. Sometimes we just talk about basketball. Sometimes we just we get a drink, so we let our hair down. My partner now tells me when she talks about men relationships and men that women would be better served if men, and my circle is often black men, so I could say black men would invest more in some of the emotional development of each other, and were friends to each other in ways that perhaps women are. And again, this is not something that's innate or biological. We've talked about socialization processes that have led black men in particular to have to demonstrate strength all the time, have to demonstrate that they're not vulnerable, that they can't be poor, that they're hard workers. And maybe some of that socialization is why we don't do those things. But from a personal standpoint, perhaps I could, and now I'm going to give myself an out, add to my many list of things I need to do is develop stronger relationships with some of my friends, and male and black male friends in particular, around being emotionally vulnerable with each other and providing that space. But I'd be telling a tale to say I do that a lot. We have done it. I've had those experiences more in college than I do now, because I guess we're older and caught up. But me personally, and probably black men in general, that could be some area of development if only we had socialization that was more permissive of it.
Good deal. Hey, thanks for taking heed to her counsel. I mean, there's strength in vulnerability. And so I wish you much success in that practice. Perhaps the next time I interview you, I'll see how that's going. So tell us, let's talk about the idea and the need for solidarity. So when you think about, I know that your work and you have connections, cross-racial, various folks with different identities. I mean, how has that been important for you as Darrick? Because when I look around you and all the folks you surround yourself with, it's kind of similar to We Are the World. So what difference does that make for you as a person?
For one, it's a necessary ingredient. However hard I may work, smart I may be, if we don't have a social movement, if I'm not working in partnership with people from different spaces of life, we ain't going to change society. So I'm astute enough to know that that's a strategic, necessary ingredient. And number two, I enjoy it. I enjoy the community. I enjoy the fellowship. I enjoy the partnership. I enjoy being able to have conversation. I like people. I really do. I have, one of my best friends from high school, a woman, she's a veterinarian. And one day she said, well, I don't like people. That's why I'm a veterinarian. I prefer to just be around animals. Some people get on my nerves. And that's fair, and it's not completely true. She gets along very well with people, but I adore people. I like co-authoring papers because I like the scholarship of community to get it done. I enjoy working with multiple people, engaging in conversation, the common narratives, the cooperation, and as equally important as the other two, the fellowship, the trust building, the ability to have a drink. The best experience in college was not in the classroom. The best experiences in college are the relationships outside of the classroom, the fostering of that community where you can get together with, whether it's a faculty person. That's why liberal arts schools are oftentimes more developmental, because they offer you greater access to faculty and stuff like that. But the access to people and allow those relationships to build in generative, unpredicted ways is critical for innovation and also personally pleasing, particularly for me.
Okay, thank you for that. Where do you, because you recognize, I'm sure, that your agenda and your charge, which that's what we partner with you, is one that everybody doesn't necessarily agree with. Right. So I'm sure you have days at the end of the day where you're exhausted and taxed, and even throughout the day because of the things you experience in terms of being a black man alone. Where do you draw your strength from? Like, how do you get up every day and keep doing this? Like, how do you do that?
This is spiritual. That's the faith and the spiritual part. I'm not a religious person, but I believe I'm a spiritual person. And in part, I'm not as religious because I don't have the discipline. And maybe that's a cop out, but that's my interpretation of. I would feel hypocritical to not have the discipline to do some of the tenets and then sometimes finding the right religion, right? It hasn't personally. I grew up through a Quaker school, and I believe that Quakers have a real good beat on justice, faith, and spirituality. So I'm not a Quaker because I'd be a hypocrite to claim myself as a Quaker, but I'm drawn to that religion. I'm drawn to that faith. But one of the takeaways from that faith is, and other faiths have this too, it's not uniquely Quaker, but not a separation of justice, social justice, from the tenets of faith. So the most thing, the endeavor for which I don't need to be compelled by any evidence, any empirics, any narrative per se, is justice, of fairness, right? It is a desire that people can have empowerment to be self-determining in righteous ways. I'm committed to that as a matter of faith. So the extent to whether I'm successful or not successful on a day-to-day basis, it might make me temporarily sad or whatever, but it's not going to stop me. That's where I get my strength and drive from, and also a recognition that I have the privilege to actually pursue this. That I also said I reject poverty, and from a personal standpoint, I've seen it, I've experienced it, and I don't want to experience it, and I'm going to do whatever I can to not experience it. So I have the good fortune to be in an endeavor that allows me to not be poor, and not only not be poor, thrive. I'm doing fairly well. There are others around me that aren't, that I wish were. But the actual task of what I do is a matter of faith.
Thank you. And I appreciate that and share that perspective with regard to faith being a source of strength for me as well, and that staying focused on that North Star and the charge. And so, again, I'm going to attempt to read this question as I have these new reading glasses, because I probably need prescription in the now. So what do you think of the more obvious buy Black movement? How can we more practically engage in it? And we only have a few minutes left. We're not in a rush, but I just wanted you to be aware. So this might be a final question from the audience, in addition to any closing thoughts that you might have.
So Darrick Ball is the scholar that has done the most persuasive, comprehensive work on that question of buying Black. So I encourage everybody. He's a professor at an HBCU. What is it, in Baltimore? I forgot the name. Morgan State. So Darrick Ball would have it. So I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that he says, and then some of my knowledge. I think it is righteous and can improve the lives of individuals when we think in solidarity and put some of our resources in areas that are overlooked, especially because of race. So that is a good thing to do, to buy Black. But at the end of the day, that's not a solution for our structural problems. Why? Because we don't have resources, because we don't have the capital, we don't have the means of productions and all the activities that are necessary for the means of production, where that's ultimately going to be a solution. That's not going to save us, buying Black, because what I began with is the source of inequality, especially across race, is capital itself. And why don't we have capital? Because there's a long history of an exclusion from policies that have built capital for others, and also a vulnerability from not having the political protections of when we were able to amass capital, that it was not secure from theft, terror, and other forms of malfeasance. So that's why Black people don't have capital today. There's been structures of extraction and exploitation. But in order for us to get capital and to address our wealth disparity, then we need what others have had, which is public facilitation of that capital so that we can, again, accumulate wealth. So this is not a narrative of we can't do anything and we have no agency. When we think about power, there's economic power, but there's also political power. There's also collective efficacy. There's also a notion of linked fate where if Black people and people in general, people that are interested in justice and righteousness, if they were to compel their government in a collective way to do what they're supposed to do, which is the fiduciary responsibility of government, its people, and compel justice upon government in a retrospective way. A lot of conversation around reparations, and that's critical and important. And I could say a whole lot about why that would be useful and important, but it's not alone. There's this economic rights initiative that we're talking about as well, which not only reparations is a retrospective redress that's a necessary ingredient for us to dispel the narratives that are false, that Black people are a deficit population, to do the truth and reconciliation of all the harms that have been done to us and resource deprivation, along with the accompanying redress. Otherwise, that apology is empty. That's a direct and parsimonious way to redress the past, but it's not enough, because you know what happens? Capital does what it does best. It consolidates, it iterates, for some at the exclusion of others. So something in a prospective way going forward, we will also need policies to ensure, even after reparations is implemented, that people have economic rights. And not just with capital, with health, with basic income, with schooling, with free mobility throughout society, that enabling goods and services are adequately supplied and not rationed based on a profit incentive of acquiring profit through charging high prices and restricting output, but rather facilitated with universal access of an adequate quantity and quality in a way that people can thrive.
Thank you so much. That was really well stated. And so, as I indicated, we're just about out of time. So I wanted to see if you have any closing remarks, and definitely want to thank APHSA for this opportunity to influence, build, and connect, which is their aspiration. And I think they're doing a great job at that. But how would you like to close? Is there anything that you want to say, sing, rap? The floor is yours for about 1 minute, 2 minutes.
You sure don't want to hear me rap or sing. I'm gonna end with, again, emphasizing that I'm going to emphasize three things on both sides. One, it is our government. Our government has a monetary system that enables us to be empowered and pay for things. So it is our monetary system which facilitates the capacity of government to deliver. And then ultimately, it is our economy. So these structural problems that we're describing are not we are not structured in a way that we can't overcome. It's a matter of when we seize power, they're grounded in power. We need to recognize that economics is inseparable from politics, and race is inseparable from economics and politics. The ways in which we can have this growing inequality is to convince the politically dominant white class that at least you won't be Black, to create the property rights and whiteness. So it's a recognition that all these concepts are inseparable. And we can aspire values where we don't just value self-interested accumulation with no bounds, but we value prosperity, shared prosperity. We value human dignity. We value agency amongst people. That these are not pie in sky ideas. These are humanistic ideas, and we actually can achieve a moral economy. And then finally, I'll say that in so doing, we need common narratives. We need cooperation amongst entities. and we need the fellowship. We need to enjoy this while we do this. And I said finally, but finally has to be gratitude to you, Raquel. Finally has to be when saying narratives, cooperation, and fellowship. I am glad and gleeful to be in partnership with you in recognition that we need to do this work together, because in isolation, we are vulnerable and we won't be able to achieve our goals.
Well, thank you again. And Dr. H, I want to thank you, because Kresge Foundation is certainly happy to have you as a partner, because you advise us in many ways in terms of how we might inform our own point of view. Again, thanks to the APHSA and everybody who joined today. And also, just to let you know, you'll be getting information from APHSA in the coming weeks about another guest that's going to be on. Renata Soto and John Simpkins will be talking more about racism and poverty as it emerges in the South, and you don't want to miss that. Thanks again to all, and we look forward to you and our continued focus on advancing racial equity and justice in America. Have a great day. Thank you.